I'm just one beggar showing another beggar where I found bread. I love that quote from Lee Arnold. You're going to really enjoy this show that I just recorded with Lee, so I can't wait for you to get on. But first, I want to highlight a couple of things. Be sure to listen to how he helped coach thousands of people to buy their first investment property. And remember, he's coaching them, hey, if you're broke, don't buy real estate. So remember, he's teaching people how to flip houses as well as then how to invest once they have got some money. He wants them to raise capital and not buy broke. He thinks one of the biggest mistakes he made was trying to buy houses with no money down in the initial onset of his career, and that led him to absolutely getting lambasted through 2008. Now he's built himself back up. He's one of the preeminent coaches of the Lee Arnold system. So please sit back, enjoy, and listen to this episode of the Mistake for Real Estate podcast. Welcome to another edition of the Mistake for Real Estate podcast. I am your host, Marck and today joined by one of my friends from the Collective Genius Mastermind and someone I've come to really admire from the business that they have built. Today I'm joined by no one other than Lee Arnold from the Lee Arnold Training Systems. Lee, how are you today, buddy?
I'm doing fantastic, Mark. Thanks for having me here.
Lee, you once said that you were one beggar showing another beggar where I found bread. I love that quote. Tell me about that.
Well, I was broke. When I got started investing in real estate, I was making $3.90 an hour at the grocery store. And I didn't have a clue how to make money. And it was only because I saw an infomercial on TV and went to a free seminar at the DoubleTree Hotel that somebody else invested into me. Of course, I had to pay them, but they were at least willing to invest in me to learn how to do this. So since I learned how to do it, started having success at it, now the biggest portion of our company is teaching other people how to invest in real estate.
So when you say doing this, what was it? How did you first get started? What was the lesson you learned, and how did you apply that?
The number one lesson I learned, which probably resonated so loudly with me at the time because I was broke, penniless, my credit cards were maxed out, I was living in a mobile home. Literally at the end of my rope financially.
Give me some context. How old are you, and are you married at this stage?
No, I'm 18 years old at this stage. I've just graduated high school. I'm attending community college. And this is before the government went crazy with student loans. So I'm financing and self-funding all of this. I grew up in a home, we weren't rich, we weren't poor. Mom was a stay-at-home mom, so we had a single income household. And we only ever had what we needed, never nothing more. So I was not surrounded by people of affluence or wealth or how to create wealth. And so I was broke. I was kind of following in the roots of what I learned and what I'd grown up in. So when somebody told me that funding is attracted to opportunity, not people, that really jumped out at me because I was the least attractive person from a financial standpoint. And they said this, Lee, if you'll just go out and find a great deal that fits in these parameters, funding will be readily available. And so being young and dumb enough to believe that, I went out and found a deal that fit the parameters and got it under contract for a very, very low amount of money. Got a private money lender to pony up the cash to buy it and fix it. 6 months later, I flipped it. So now I'm 19 years old and I've just made $16,000 on flipping a house when I'm making $3.90 an hour at the grocery store full time. I just made a 2-year salary on one transaction. So from that point, I'm hooked, and real estate became my career.
So you never went from high school to college?
I spent 2 years in college.
Okay.
And after I started flipping real estate with some frequency, I went, you know what? I'm going to do this full time. And here was the catalyst for me, Mark. I was sitting in Philosophy 101 because this was one of the classes you had to take to get your AA degree before you could move up to a 4-year university. And I don't know why, but my professor on that particular day announced that he was making 45 grand a year. Now, this is back in the mid 90s. So he's making 45 grand a year, which at that time was a decent income. And he said this, he said, if you want to one day live the life like me and have 3 months off a year, listen to everything that I say. Well, I was also reading Kiyosaki's book, Rich Dad Poor Dad, at the same time. And Kiyosaki said if you want to be successful, you need to hang out with successful people who are succeeding at the very thing you want to be successful at. I didn't want to be a philosophy 101 instructor. So it was literally after that class that I made the decision to drop out of college and go do real estate full time. And I began surrounding myself with successful real estate investors and joining mastermind groups like Collective Genius, where you and I met. And it was those introductions, it was those mentors investing into my career that is really what's propelled me to where we are today.
So did you ever have, you said that you weren't surrounded by affluence or necessarily net worth from a young age. Who did you look up to as a child? Were there people that you looked at and said, man, I'd like to be like that guy? Or did you have aspirations before real estate as to what career path you would take?
The wealthiest man that I knew at that time was my grandfather. And my grandfather was a cattle rancher. And I spent my summers on the farm with him herding cattle and, driving tractors and cutting hay and throwing hay in the barn and bucking bales. And so I believed that the pathway to wealth was by owning cattle. And I grew up on a little 5-acre ranchette, and I was begging my father to put up a fence so I could get a cow. And I saved up $400 mucking out stalls at a horse ranch to save up $400 so I could go to the auction with my grandfather and buy a cow. And my dad never put up the fence, so I couldn't buy the cow. And so my plans to get rich were foiled at that point. And I ended up spending the $400 on a keyboard, taught myself how to play the piano, and now I'm the church pianist and have been for the last 30 years. So, God's always got an interesting plan for your life. But I thought being a farmer was the pathway to wealth. That's all I knew.
I love that background story, which I didn't know about you, because I've always known you as this uber successful guy from Coeur d'Alene, and that you teach others how to do it. That really must have impacted your desire to train others, because truly, when you say, if I can do it, anyone can do it, that means something to you, right?
Yeah, it's hard for me to meet somebody that is in a worse financial situation than I was. And so if I was able to do it, literally, and I say this with as much sincerity as I can, anybody can do this business.
Tell me a little bit about your training program and how many people now you have helped, because you've had it for, tell me how that was birthed, like from the shifting, you're shifting mindsets as I see your business, right? It's not about, the nuts and bolts of how you flip a house are obviously a part of your story, but how much do you have to try and help people change their minds that it is possible? Is that a big part of kind of a day one?
Well, we have Tony Robbins to thank for most people believing that they can do something, right? And then if you recall years ago, that book and video that came out from Rhonda Byrne called The Secret, if you remember this,
yep.
Right? And if you just think positive things in the atmosphere, that the universe is going to give you back wealth. The missing component, though, to both of those things is you need to have a strategy and a vehicle to accomplish those things. And for most people, real estate is the most accessible thing because there's two things everybody needs. It's a place to live and food to eat. Well, farming was not going to be my path, so the next step was place to live. Well, learning that funding is attracted to opportunity, not people, meant I need to go out and find really great deals that people would want to live in, that investors are willing to lend me money on. And so I just started teaching our 5-point criteria, and I'll give it to you very quickly. We look at properties that are less than half of an acre of ground, properties that are less than 2,800 square feet, properties with less than 5 bedrooms and 3 baths, properties that are 1 to 4 units, so we don't do commercial, it's single family, duplex, triplex, fourplex, and it's properties where the retail sales price does not exceed the FHA cap in any given market. Now, that criteria is the result of me losing almost everything in 2008, because in 2003 and 4 and 5 and 6, I was building luxury 14,000 square foot homes in Park City, Utah. Ski in, ski out, backside of Deer Valley, strap on your skis, roll out your back door, you're on the hill. Well, in 8, when the market tanked, the government didn't come in and bail out developers building these beautiful homes. They came in and bailed out first-time home buyers, second-time home buyers, builders that were developing a single-family product. And so I realized in that moment that the safest place to invest in real estate is in the 5-point criteria that I just gave you. Now, the next biggest challenge that a new investor, or any investor for that matter, is going to have most likely is, where do I get the money? Okay, Lee, if I do what you say, I go find properties that fit in those 5-point criteria, where am I going to get the money? And so in 2010, we started a nationwide private money lending company. And since that time, we've lent out almost $1 billion to our clients, students, if you will, who will go out, implement the training we've given them. We'll provide the funding for them. And our goal for our clients, we have 2 goals. Goal number 1 is help them generate $250,000 in cash, so they're not beholden to the lender. They literally can find great deals, execute, pull the trigger, buy the property. Goal number 2 is to help them become an accredited investor so that they can invest in one of our private equity funds, and they now become the lender to the new people coming into our system. So they go from being the person who needs the handout to being the person who's giving the handout. And so we refer to it internally as our circle of wealth, and we try to take all of our clients through that pathway from wherever they are financially. Don't care how much money they have, don't care if they have a job or not, don't care if they have good credit or not. I didn't, so why should they? And then we just shepherd them through the process to become an accredited investor.
So fix and flipping's one thing, obviously. Buy and holding's another. How do you coach the mindset of making money and paying tax versus holding and building wealth?
Well, it used to be very different until 2006. I had one of those epiphanal moments. I was having dinner with George Ross. Do you know who George Ross is?
I do not.
So you remember back in 2002, 2003 when The Apprentice first came out with Donald Trump?
Yeah.
You remember the bald-headed, cranky old guy?
Yeah.
Okay, that's George Ross.
Okay.
So he and I were at a conference in Myrtle Beach, and I was speaking there, and afterwards we ended up sitting next to each other for dinner. And, we were going through the pleasantries, and he says, so Lee, tell me what you do. And I started explaining to him about our real estate system and how we teach people how to invest in real estate. And George Ross literally gives me one of those real estate investing. He said, what a joke. He says, I know more people have lost $1 million investing in real estate than those that have made $1 million investing in real estate. And I'm sitting here looking at it going, you're Donald Trump's attorney. The guy's got like $14 billion worth of rental income properties. Based on what are you saying that? So I said, George, I'll bite. I said, if what you're saying is true, what's the fatal flaw? Why is what you're saying true? He said, Lee, people buy rental properties too early. They read these books like No Money Down Real Estate. And so they go find these properties in these terrible neighborhoods because the only person who's willing to carry financing for you on a piece of property is one that they can't sell to a qualified borrower, a property that won't qualify for financing because it doesn't have a foundation or a footing or a roof. That's why they do 100% seller financing with no money down. He said, the way that you build a rental portfolio that will sustain you and provide passive income for life, he said, you first generate enough cash to make the 30% down so you can buy quality assets in quality neighborhoods. You can get quality 30-year loans at bank rates, and you simply let the property pay itself off. And I said, okay, that's genius, George. So I took what George said, and we've adopted it into our system since 2006. And Mark, the reason that our first goal for our clients is $250,000 in cash is we encourage them to flip and wholesale real estate until they have $250,000 in cash. Now, take your money and go buy good quality assets in good neighborhoods where you aren't afraid of your tenants, where you don't have to carry a shotgun to collect rents. Now that's how you start building wealth. So I love passive income. I love cash flow and turnkey real estate, but I think for some, they buy it too early and they don't have the cash to weather the storm of vacancies or a heater going out or a tenant trashing the place. You got to have some liquidity to cover when those things occur. And a lot of people don't have that going in.
No, mate. So we have the luxury of working probably more with high income, high net worth individuals. And so that's why I was very interested in learning, because we don't coach people in any respect whatsoever from that entry level phase. And I've always wondered what that thought process is, but it certainly aligns because we appreciate the fact that, if there's a vacancy on one of our units, our investors are not going to be panicking because they know that it's, just part of the process and they've got financial reserves and they can weather the storm. But those that can't, real estate could be a burden rather than a blessing.
Right. And I was there, when I started buying and holding properties in my late teens, early 20s. Nobody told me to wholesale and flip until I had cash reserves. Nobody taught me that. And so I was following all of the guidance of the Robert Allen's No Money Down Real Estate, and I was getting people to carry financing for me. And the very property that I described, the property in the war-torn area, the property that you're only going to attract troubled tenants, the property that doesn't have a foundation, so it's not financeable. These were the types of assets that I was acquiring. And man, I was like this close to getting out of the business because I hated it. The tenants were terrible. Things were constantly breaking. People were breaking in. It wasn't any fun. I wish somebody would have told me what I just told you in your audience. It would have saved me years of pain.
No, A and B assets, good. Please repeat it because we are right there. I'll repeat it because I'm right there with you. Good assets in good areas with good school districts that will stand the test of time. And if you buy and hold those assets, real estate is a joy and a great medium for wealth accumulation.
Amen.
What are you seeing in the market currently, Lee? We're sitting in a time of interest rates increasing, inflation on the rise. How is that impacting what you're doing in both the flip, what are your, obviously in training, how that's impacting your students, and then also on the lending side of the equation, what's going on in your world?
I was talking to an economist the other day, and he made a statement that I haven't heard anybody else make. And here's what he said. He said, the market that we are in has many people are equating it to 2007, 2008. He said, I think that's the wrong application. He said, I would equate the market that we're in to 1999, right? Y2K. So there's all this fear and trepidation in the marketplace that is really, for the most part, unfounded. I mean, everybody thought that the world was going to end when computer systems didn't turn to 2000 from 1999. Yep. We're going to have this total global meltdown. Well, as soon as 1999 ended and we flipped to January 1st of 2000, people went, oh, okay, I guess the world's not ending. And it took 6 or 8 months for the markets to unwind and get moving a little bit, but they got started much quicker. If you look at 2008 and the subsequent crash of 9, it took like 4 years for the markets to really kind of reestablish themselves and start gaining ground again. I believe that the market that we are in right now is not the gloom and doom that everybody is peddling out there. My wife and I recently went to Las Vegas to go to a concert and a show down there for our anniversary. And this is in the midst of rising interest rates, people out of their minds crazy thinking that the sky is falling financially, and yet every craps table was full, every poker table was full, every restaurant was packed, standing room only. I believe that this recession is more media hype than it is reality. Now, it is affecting because euphoria of buying, market, consumer confidence is important for real estate sales and acquisition, but we're still only seeing, even in some of the worst torn markets, we're only seeing 5 to 8% reduction in value. I mean, in 2008, we were seeing 30 and 40 and 50% reduction in value. So I don't see the market the way some of these gloom and doomers are seeing it. Certainly it's slowed. And that's creating some pressure on people who overpaid, bought at the top of the market of 2001, where they got a 3% loan, which was fabulous, but they paid 30% more than the house is probably now worth. Those people are in trouble. But there's going to be opportunities for loan modifications and workouts. So I don't see the glutton of foreclosures that everybody's predicting. Certainly we're seeing better deals. There's never been a better time to buy, in my opinion. Even with interest rates higher, you're getting a better price, so the payment's about the same. My encouragement to people is now's a great time to be buying. Don't pull back, don't slow down, don't get out of the market. If anything, now's the time to engage and get into the market because so many other people are sitting on the sidelines, and it's creating some really great opportunity out there.
Yeah, because what's going to happen when interest rates lower, people are going to, when interest rates lower, people get in and prices go up again, is my take. That's an interesting take, though, the comparison to 1999. I will steal that. I like that a lot. Hey, one of the books that influenced me and my investing career was written by Meredith Whitney. It's called The Fate of the States. Have you read this?
I have not.
So would highly recommend it. It's dated now, which I think she did write it back in 2013. However, she accurately predicted this migration patterns within America that we are seeing play out in a very real way now with the pension funds that are crippling the states such as Washington and California and New York, and how there's this flight of these states and people are fleeing. And I think I see in Northern California them coming into Coeur d'Alene, as well as Salt Lake City, Southern California, going to Arizona and Texas. A lot of people in New York and New Jersey fleeing to Florida. Certainly, it seems like it's going from blue to red as well. So take with that what you will. But these liberal states that are high tax states we're seeing a playing out of this migration pattern that she had accurately predicted. What do you see? Are you seeing the net migration positive into Idaho?
Yeah, we were written up. This little tiny town of Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, which for those that don't know, I'm in northern Idaho. I'm about 100 miles south of the Canadian border, and I'm wedged right between Spokane, Washington, and Missoula, Montana. So that's where Coeur d'Alene, Idaho is. We were written up in the New York Times last April as being one of the fastest growing cities in America. And then the state of Idaho was usually top one or top two or three all of 2020, 2021, and 2022 as fastest growing. Well, why? Well, it's because we have very conservative political views here. People are still allowed to open carry guns, which is important to a lot of people. And we're not buying into a lot of the political things that you're seeing in these very, very blue states that are taxing people so heavily. State of New York taxing people 55% of their income, right? You just can't live like that. And so it's forcing people into our markets. Now, that's both good and bad. It's great because those of us who were here and owned real estate, we've seen almost 100% increase in value, in some areas 150% increase in values. The disadvantage is it's pushing out all of the affordable housing where the local population can't afford to live and work here anymore. And for those of us that are employers, it's hard to meet the expectations. I just interviewed somebody yesterday coming from California. They were applying for a $60,000 a year job where they came from California making $140,000 doing the exact same thing. It's like it just doesn't pencil. And their argument was, well, a house here costs as much as it does in California. And I said, I appreciate that, but that's not the market we are in. So we do have some income disparity of these higher wage expectations coming out of these markets, but it's both good and bad, both pro and con. It's simply looking at it and going, okay, how do we win with these outside influences and these internal indicators?
Interesting. Yeah, the affordable housing is something that we have the ability, and here in Kansas City, we're not landlocked in any way, and obviously, we don't. It's not a huge tourist town. So although we're seeing a lot of positive migration from the same states I just mentioned, we still have a ton of affordable housing. We just did, some new construction fourplexes that have been extremely popular, but they're renting out at $14.95, and just you can't even keep them on the shelf as far as a leasing perspective goes. And this is a 1,200 square foot row home kind of thing. So it's interesting, and it's something that I think we need to be mindful of as we as investors and developers reach for helping those that are looking for housing. There has to be a concerted effort from our governments to make sure that it doesn't get so objectionable on the sales price or the rental rate even, that someone like yourself that's wanting to employ people makes it unfeasible, and people having to commute an hour into work every day from some other town that they really don't want to live in.
Right.
Hey,
the state of Washington,
go ahead.
The state
Sorry.
of Washington, right now, there's legislation that's been proposed, and they're voting on this next week, where the state of Washington is setting aside government funds to acquire multifamily homes and apartment buildings that will be government owned, government ran, specifically to provide affordable housing as well as housing for the homeless. Now, this is going back to the 60s and the 70s where we had the projects, right? That didn't work. Everybody knows that government housing is a bad idea. Government needs to partner with private enterprise and provide grants so that we can build affordable housing. The challenge that we have, and I've got several communities going up, I know you're a developer as well, Mark, but it's costing me to build these new homes as much as they are worth by the time I get done.
Yes.
Because the cost of dirt is so high, the cost of labor is so high, and with labor being so costly, cutting down trees is also really expensive, and so lumber is high. So it's getting very difficult for developers to build affordable housing product and make a profit because the costs of doing it are so extreme. So there's got to be tax incentives, there's got to be grants that are being proposed, but the governments themselves buying and controlling this real estate is a really bad idea. So I'm hoping that this does not pass in Washington, and I actually live in the state of Washington, so I'll be voting aggressively against this bill. Not that I'm not in favor of affordable housing and taking care of the homelessness population, but doing it through governmental public enterprise, I think, is a bad idea.
Completely agree. Appreciate that perspective. Pivot for a little bit. Lee, I know you're a man of faith, as am I. In fact, I turned to you recently in a time of need just because I appreciate you as a prayer warrior in my life, and I appreciate you praying for our family at this moment. You are passionate about equipping business leaders to be strong in their faith. Talk me through your mindset there and how you see what are the obstacles that business leaders face and the business leaders face in professing their faith in Christianity in today's world.
How long is your show, Mark?
Should I have led with that?
Well, political correctness. I think where the media has been very successful and where non-believers have been very successful is to suggest that me sharing my faith is in some way a microaggression against you. And that by me being bold for Jesus and wearing a cross on my lapel, that somehow that's an offense to you. And so governments have passed all of these laws as it relates to what you can and can't do as a Christian-led, Christian-ran, Christian-owned business. And we started an entire ministry around this very concept, and we put on an annual conference called the Be Bold for Jesus Conference, equipping business leaders to be bold in their business. Because there are a lot of laws that are favorable to those who want to run a Christian organization and have Bible studies and prayer meetings with their employees, not mandated, not required, but optional. And I feel like political correctness has scared believers to the point that they're just not sharing their faith with anybody. Well, as a result of this, we're seeing a continual decline in the number of Americans who claim any relationship with Jesus Christ at all. If you go back to the 70s, we had an 80% of the population declared some faith in a higher power, some faith in God. You look at today, we're sitting right now at 53%. So a 27% decline over 4 decades of people who are no longer choosing or claiming belief in God or belief in his son, Jesus Christ. And that's really unfortunate. I made a comment to my staff the other day, my executive leadership team. I said, I don't know how people who don't have faith in God run a business because it is stressful. And I openly tell everybody, God is the CEO of this business, and I am so glad that he is, because if he wasn't, I'd be doing a much worse job. Because, running a business is wrought with risks and difficulties and challenges. But I believe that God guides, God provides. And as long as we are staying in faith and running the business according to his will, I believe that we're going to be successful.
Amen.
Or as successfully as he would have us to be. Appreciate
your thoughts. You talked about how stressful and challenging business can be. What have been some of the mistakes? This podcast, as you know, is called Mistake-Free Real Estate, very much tongue-in-cheek. There is no such thing as mistake-free real estate. The idea that, hey, we've made all the mistakes in real estate so that our investors don't have to as a turnkey operator. What are some of the mistakes that you've made in business that you would tell people that are kind of going down a journey to get their first deal in real estate to avoid?
I think the most helpful statement I can make is this: debt and leverage are not income. Debt and leverage are not income. And let me explain that. I started investing in 95, 96. Interest rates, when I started buying houses in the late 90s, interest rates were 8.5%, 9%. Well, in the wake of 2001, World Trade Center going down, Obama coming out with all these policies, dropping interest rates to the basement in 2008 when the recessionary crisis was hitting. If you remember 2009 or 10, I believe it was cash for clunkers, where you bring in a car, whether it runs or not, you get $4,500, right? That was kind of the beginning of this unraveling of cheap money. Well, in 2005, 6, and 7, what I was doing, I was going down to the auction. I was buying houses for 50, 60 cents on the dollar. I was fixing them up enough to put a tenant in them so they're cash flowing. Then I was refinancing them. If you remember, you could get a 125% loan back in those days. So I had millions and millions of dollars worth of real estate, and I leveraged my portfolio well above 100% of the value. I was then taking the levered money and I was lending it as a hard money lender or a private money lender to other investors. Well, if you looked at my balance sheet, I had very little income because money was coming in and loans were being paid. So there wasn't a lot of cash flow outside of borrowing money. Well, when 2008 comes and suddenly I'm calling my lenders on my construction and my development projects and they're saying, sorry, Lee, we're not honoring your construction loans anymore because your bank's been overrun and taken over by the FDIC. I'm sitting here going, well, wait a minute. Now what do I do? One of the biggest indicators for me, I'll never forget, I was in Austin, Texas. This is July of 8. I'm in Austin, Texas. I'm teaching a workshop there, and I go to Starbucks, and I hand them my American Express Platinum card. There's no limit on this Platinum card, right? No limit. And I get declined to buy an $8 cup of coffee at Starbucks. And so I call American Express, and I'm like, what's going on? And they said, we're sorry, sir, but your line has been reduced. And I said, reduced to what? It's an unlimited card. They said, well, no, we reserve the right to limit it to whatever we want, whenever we want. And so they limited it to what I owed. And every time I would make a payment, they'd reduce the line. So I had no liquidity. So what I learned from that is debt and leverage is not income. You might feel like it is. Like if you go refinance your house and get a home equity line of credit, you got $100,000. That's not cash. All right, you got to pay that back. And that sounds like a really simple lead. That's dumb. Everybody knows that. I didn't. I really thought I was doing well because I had all these loans, all these lines of credit. Banks were just willing to write me checks. And that's how I was running the company. Today, we run the company on cash. I don't have any lines of credit. I don't have loans from banks outside of construction loans on projects and some of my real estate. But for the most part, everything we do is cash. And I kind of feel like if God isn't giving me the cash for it, then I don't need it. And since we've been running the business that way, this new, I use air quotes because I don't believe it's the recession that everybody's claiming it to be. I'm not worried about it because we're not in this situation of being over leveraged or deeply in debt. And it's a much better, safer, more enjoyable way to run a business.
Sound financial advice, my friend. What would you do differently? What would you tell your younger self if you were to go back and do things differently the second time around?
Don't buy into your own press.
Ego?
Ego. I was young, right? I'm in my early 20s and I'm making millions of dollars in real estate through debt and leverage. And I really think that I'm all that in a bag of chips. I was arrogant. I was egotistical. I was far from God in those moments because when we're rich, we don't feel like we need a higher power. But suddenly when we're poor and going through a difficult time, suddenly God becomes important again. And I was so ahead of my skis, I believe is the statement.
Yep.
I was taking on debt, taking on projects that, I didn't know how I was going to get to the other side of them, but I felt like I had the Midas touch, so I figure it out. And stay humble. That's the advice. Stay humble, stay in affordable housing, stay in the 5-point criteria that I gave you. There's nothing wrong with wanting to own skyscrapers and build giant property, but if you can't do it with cash, don't do it. Stick to what works. Stick to the fundamentals. Stick to the basics. And if you will do that, you will have a very successful, thriving business. You will have cash flow like you can't believe, and you will sleep at night because you're not deeply or heavily in debt.
Such solid advice, my friend. Appreciate it. I'm going to give a little pitch for you, and then I'm going to come back to that final question that I mentioned to you. For those of you that would like more information on Lee Arnold and Lee Arnold's system, please go to leearnoldsystem.com, as well as on Facebook, Lee Arnold System. He is, if you Google Lee Arnold, he is all over because he has helped. He's got a group of 35,000 followers on Facebook, a ton of followers, because he has helped so many people transform their lives through real estate. So appreciative of everything you've done to our community and to maintain the integrity in this space, my friend.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Mark.
Lee, final question. As you know, I'm a golfer, have a passion for it, and one of my goals in the coming future will be to come up and play Coeur d'Alene resort course there with that magical floating green on the lake, which is kind of idyllic. I enjoy golf for a couple of reasons, Lee. One is that you really get to enjoy the outdoors at the same time as enjoying companionship. You know, spending 4 hours with someone, you really get to know the core of who they are. Especially when they're confronted with challenges that the game of golf is unique at presenting. You know, it throws a lot of curveballs at you, and even when you can play well, you get the bad breaks. And, you know, a 4-hour round of golf is a small microcosm of life. You know, you start with high hope and expectations, you meet with disaster, you overcome this realization that, hey, it's not all about you, and you're there to just enjoy it and have some fun. You drop the ego, you enjoy, you start playing better, and then you have a beer at the end of the day and say, that was a pretty good day. All of that to ask you one final question that I enjoy, which would be, if you were to have 3 guests to play a final foursome with you, either historical figures or those that you would just enjoy spending time with, who would your foursome be?
Well, I wrote, when you asked me the question, I wrote the answers down, and I know that these might be cliche, but they are the 3 that immediately came to my mind. First one, Jesus Christ. I look forward to spending eternity with him, but I'd love to play golf with him.
Yep. He'd shoot 18.
He's a great mentor, but I think he might be able to help my game. Yeah. You know, maybe some miracle shots. That would be helpful. The second one would be Abraham Lincoln. I am a big Lincoln fan. You can see this picture of George Washington here over my shoulder. I'm also a big Ronald Reagan fan. You know, I like men that lead through humility and service. And Abraham Lincoln and, you know, his drive and motivation to free the slaves and eliminate that. I just think that was such a big, incredible thing to focus on at the time. I mean, you want to talk about adversity. I mean, there wasn't anything that was more opposed than that. And that's, of course, how we ended up with the Civil War. But the way that he handled it, a great book I love called Lincoln on Leadership, is one that I've read numerous times, just because of the way that he led people and spoke to them. Just a powerful, powerful man. And then the last one would be Warren Buffett. And I'll tell you why. It's not because he's rich. It's because that in the midst of all of his success, he still lives in the same little 4-bedroom, 2-bath house. He still drives the same 50-year-old truck. He still wears the same suit that he had tailored back in 1968. You know, he's just a humble guy. Yeah. And money has not changed him. And he will die one of the wealthiest men to ever lived, and he's already given half of it away. I've always said this. One of my goals as a business owner, as a believer, is to make billions of dollars and give it all away before I'm gone. And I believe that if God has given us the ability, by surrounding us with people that know how to generate income, who will teach us, mentor us through that, and then we now have the ability to go out and generate wealth. I believe that we need to do it, but not so we can live in jumbo homes or drive luxurious cars. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but so that we can serve other people with it, and through that service, we can lead other people to Christ. So I am what we call a missionpreneur. We incorporate what we call business as a ministry, or BAM, in our business. So every aspect of what we do is about sharing the gospel. Even our tenants, when we have tenants move into our rental property, they're given gospel tracts, they're given a Bible, they're given an invitation to come join us at church. They're given the hotline to our ministry. and anything they need from the standpoint of just support or comfort or encouragement. We provide them that through our nonprofit ministry called He's the Solution Ministries. But that was the major shift from me coming out of 2008 and 9, is that I needed to make this business about serving the kingdom, not serving myself. So that's why I chose Warren Buffett.
Fantastic. I love a man with a little bit of thought, so I'm glad I gave you a little bit of a heads up on that question. Proved to be a valuable one. Lee, thanks so much. I always enjoy my time with you. Appreciate your friendship, your mentorship, and also the way that you give back to the community. So thank you so much for your time today.
As do I yours. Thank you, Mark. I appreciate it.
You're listening to Mistake-Free Real Estate Radio, the authority in passive real estate investing. No late-night calls, no clogged drains, no tenant nightmares. Take the passive investor's approach to real estate investing and trust a turnkey professional. Learn more at mistakefreerealestate.com. Until next time, remember, you don't get rich from what you earn, you get rich from what you own.